Hello everyone and welcome back to What If Deku Had a Werewolf Quirk. So let's get started. We continue off from the end of the battle trials. All Might is basically giving all the students props for having tried their hardest to basically strategize and come up with the best ways to complete each of their tasks. He tells them that they need to make sure that they apply like a bit more tact in like covering for the obvious setbacks that they had to face during the tests. Basically like take the losses that they had suffered and learn from them. Use it to make them better. And as the students are about to make their way back to the main campus, Deku is walking with Uraraka, and All Might is following the students back when Deku just suddenly feels this sense of deja vu. With all the other students crowded around him before, he couldn't really catch the smell. But now that few of the students around him and All Might is with closer proximity to him, he feels like he smells something familiar. Something that seems very odd to him. He tries thinking about the smell, and it suddenly hits him what the smell is. It smells like old blood. But he can't put his finger on where he smelled this scent of old dried up blood from. It smells familiar. And it's grinding on him that he can't figure out what the answer is. But he decides to just let it be what it is and hope that he'll remember at some point. But it's as he begins to make his way back to the campus that him and Uraraka start talking, and he basically tells Uraraka about how he is suffering from like weird like association problems right now. She worries that like he means he's disassociating, but he assures her that's not the case. But he's having a lot of like feelings like he's seen stuff before, or like met people before, or smelled certain smells before, but for some reason it's all as if like he's experienced certain things before. Like he basically points out the Bakugo boy to her and says that there's something about him, about his name, that feels familiar to him. And that he's getting this weird smell of old blood from somewhere, but he can't seem to bring himself to remember what it is. Uraraka basically, she tells him that she believes that if something feels familiar about Bakugo, that maybe he should start or attempt to talk to him and figure out what's so familiar about him. Deku agrees. He thinks maybe that would help. And as for the whole old blood thing, she thinks that maybe he's just like smelling some like something that he thinks smells like blood, but in reality it's something else, that his nose is playing tricks on him. He agrees and chalks it up to that as well. And after essentially they get ready to go home, Izuku basically, he exits the school and sees the Bakugo boy. And he calls out to him. Katsuki, obviously, like, not knowing exactly what it's about, he turns around and looks at Deku and, like, he looks like he's semi-troubled by something, which kind of makes Deku feel very wary, but he basically walks up to Bakugo and asks him if he knows him from somewhere. Bakugo, he doesn't like lash out or anything. He kind of like asks Izuku if he recognizes him. Mind you, in this version, Bakugo is a lot more tame. He's not as hot-headed in this version. So he's not going to just like start freaking out or insulting people for no reason. Essentially, he like gets a good look at Izuku, and Izuku asks if Bakugo knows him. Bakugo says that he reminds him of an old friend that he used to have that disappeared a long time ago. But his friend was quirkless, so he doesn't believe that it could be him. Izuku kinda feels like he knows Bakugo from somewhere, but he isn't entirely sure. Then Izuku asks Bakugo, well, what was his friend's name? Bakugo becomes very reminiscent. He thinks back to the meek, shy, awkward young boy he used to know, and tells him his name was Izuku Midoriya. And that's when a metaphorical switch clicks in Deku's head. Suddenly, a lot of memories start flooding into his head. Memories that more than likely were buried a long time ago to make up for the mental fatigue and stress of having to deal with his situation, having to be abandoned by his own mother, be treated like a freak and a monster, basically shunned by a lot of people who he didn't know, feeling like the heroes, they did nothing to help the poor boy. He was only a kid, and yet he spent so many years isolated by himself before meeting Uraraka. He starts backpedaling a little bit, and he feels his chest tighten up. And that's when he realizes that he's seconds away from basically falling into a full-on panic attack. His breath gets shallow and quick. The memories start flashing in his head, and he begins to hallucinate a green-haired woman basically like abandoning him in a forest He looks around and all he can see is grass and trees. All he feels is cold. The bitter frozen chill of the wind cutting through him like butter. His whole body begins to seize and shake. He's basically losing it. Before he knows it, he's having a full-on panic attack, and his hallucinations of his situation 10 years ago just starts catching up on him. It's like a living nightmare. He feels himself basically become frantic. He starts shifting until he basically begins to run fast, run far. As far as he knows, he doesn't know where he is. He doesn't know where he's going. All he knows is that he needs to get away. These memories, they're damaging, they're harmful. He has this sense of danger. Like if he doesn't find somewhere to hide, that he'll die. He knows that it's probably that he's probably just hallucinating, but it all feels so real to him. It's like he's really back to being a kid in that cold forest, starving, hoping he can find something to eat. Strange enough, he finds himself in an alleyway, huddled into a corner, freaking out. His panic attack is just getting worse by the minute. And he hopes for it to end. That is until he feels something wrap around him. He starts looking around frantically before realizing the thing that's wrapped around him is Ochako. She's hugging him tight. She has him basically not like in a bear hug, but like very gently with her arms wrapped around him to make him feel safe. Her embrace, it feels like an anchor for him. Like he's able to finally breathe. Finally relax. As he calms down, he realizes that he's crying. Tears cascade down his face in rapid succession as the panic attack begins to fade, as he begins to feel like he's anchored down, safe. Behind Uraka is a worried Aizawa and All Might, who he can only guess that Uraka, that saw him run away and Uraka chase after him, seeming like he was in a panic. Aizawa and All Might, basically they both get on one knee and they ask him if he's okay. They ask him what happened, and the only thing he can say is bad memories. Bad memories. Aizawa takes a deep breath and looks at the crumbling form of his student. The one with so much power, but seems so frail at the same time. Aizawa understands that it couldn't have been easy for him to have spent so much time the way he did in the situation that he was in. He can only figure that all that time basically alone messed the kid up a bit. But despite that, he believes that the kid has hope. That now that he has Ochako, a light is finally starting to become bright for him. Like he's able to finally be at peace. And with the UA staff basically acting as his surrogate family, in a sense, they hope that maybe they can fix his broken heart. But alas, it's going to be a long road where they're going to have to chip away at these walls of his. But they know that with time, he will heal, and they'll have their in. Nevertheless, they want to get to the bottom of the situation. They figure maybe a session with Hound Dog might help. And as Uraraka finally releases Izuku, he begins to shift back into his human form. Aizawa puts a hand on his shoulder and basically tilts his head to get to eye level and asks Izuku if he's okay now. Izuku looks at All Might and Aizawa and says, yeah, he's fine. He just needed a minute. That's when he smells the old blood again. This time, he knows that it's not his imagination or his mind playing tricks on him. He smells old blood. And he can smell it from All Might. His head kind of shoots up a bit, and he seems confused as to why All Might smells so familiar with the scent of old blood. He figures he'll talk to All Might about it later. He'll get basically the gist of the situation another time, but for now, he's going to have to essentially build a better mental state for himself. All Might basically approaches Izuku and he asks the young boy if he feels safe to go back to his dorm or to back home with Uraraka, or if maybe he needs to come back to the campus and talk to Hound Dog for a little bit. Izuku, he decides that he wants to maybe talk to Hound Dog a different day, but that he would rather go home and get some rest. And I'm going to say that it's later that night when him and Uraraka are basically lying down together with her basically cuddled up into him and them just kind of sitting there enjoying each other's presence. When Uraraka basically, she asks him if he feels safe sharing the memories that flooded back to him. She assures him that she's not going to force him to tell her what he remembered, but that maybe talking about it might make him feel better. He takes a deep breath and thanks her for her sentiment, for her kindness, and for her desire to help him vent his frustrations and essentially come to a point where maybe he can start to heal from these bad memories. He basically tells Uraraka that when he talked to Bakugo, that a lot of memories of before he was in the forest came back to him. He figured out what his real name was. This shocked Uraraka. She wasn't expecting him to figure out what his real name was. She wasn't expecting him to even gain these the memories of his childhood back. She knows that essentially he's had like hazy memories of his past and has had trouble recalling anything further than before, whenever he was a werewolf, like abandoned by his mother. But to hear that he remembers his real name, it kind of took her by surprise. He explains to her that Bakugo was his childhood friend from a long time ago, and how before he basically manifested his quirk, how Bakugo would stand up for him and protect him from the other students. How they basically grew up best friends and were like brothers. But his mom and Bakugo's mom, they were best friends. And when he realized or remembered who Bakugo was, he was afraid, because he didn't want to go back, or to have to be forced to go back to his mom. He didn't want to go back to her. He felt so hurt. He felt angry because his mom basically abandoned him. He was so bitter and angry about that fact. And he didn't want to basically be put in a situation where he'd be forced to go back to his legal guardian. But nevertheless, Uraraka understood where he was coming from. She understood that he didn't feel like the woman who gave birth to him was his real family. To be honest, she couldn't really be called his mother. She lost that right when she abandoned him by leaving him in a forest. But Izuku was happy that he didn't have to see her. As long as he didn't have to see her, he believed he could be happy. Now, Uraraka always knew that Izuku had a lot of issues. For a long time after she basically allowed him to stay with her, she could recall all the nights when he'd wake up in a panic, crying, whining like a scared puppy she can only assume that the memories of him being abandoned would reoccur in his dreams constantly from time to time. And she noticed that being apart from him for extended periods of time tended to have a weird effect on him, where he'd become antsy. Very antsy. Like if he was scared that he would be abandoned by her as well. He was completely fine with being alone, but if separated from someone he trusted for long periods of time, he could develop an issue where he begins to become antsy and frightened and possibly have a meltdown, a panic attack sometimes. She couldn't bear the thought of him being like that for an extended period of time, not knowing where he was and being afraid. She cuddled into him tight, and she looked into his eyes and told him that she would never leave him behind. That if his birth mother wanted him, that she'd have to take him from her dead body. Because there's no way that she'd ever let such a vile woman take her Izuku from her. Izuku was happy. He felt appreciated. He felt loved. I'm going to say that Izuku, in the coming week before the USJ, he goes and sees Hound Dog and essentially gets to talking to him. He talks to Hound Dog about all the memories, how he feels, and Hound Dog obviously reports to Nezu like that he believes that Izuku is in a very fragile state where he's gonna need a lot of healing and a lot of time to basically figure out how to feel safe again with multiple people being around. Obviously, Izuku told Hound Dog that he doesn't mind talking to Nezu about any concerns that he may have. So Nezu basically has like come up with a few ways to make it easier for Izuku to kind of be connected with the teachers and like monitored, whereas he can't, where the teachers have access to him and are able to like connect with him on a one-to-one level. Nezu has Hound Dog ask Izuku if he would feel comfortable if him and Uraraka were to basically move into a few dorms that the school has basically built as a prototype period in case they want to turn the school into a boarding school for students that aren't able to like handle the long trips from their homes to the school. And Izuku says as long as he gets to stay with Uraraka that he doesn't care. They agree. They basically come up with like a compromise and they permit him. So he began but of course, he can't move in right away. They have to build the dorms. So, for the time being, they have, like... They tell him that they will have a dorm set up for him and Uraraka sometime after an upcoming field trip. Izuku understands, and him and Uraraka basically prepare themselves to move to the dorms. Mostly because some of the teachers have also become or voiced concerns for some of their students living in not the best area. And obviously Nezu, being the very compassionate mouse, bear, dog, cat thing, he too shares their notable concerns with them being in a very shady part of town. So I'm going to basically get on to the UA field trip, whereas they begin to make their way towards the USJ. On the way there, Uraraka and Izuku are sitting in one row adjacent to a boy with spiky red hair and a girl with pink skin and little yellow horns. Nearby is a girl with a frog tongue. And basically the whole bus begins to erupt into murmurs of who has the strongest quirk. And some of the students, they believe it's Todoroki, some believe it's Bakugo, some even suggest that it's Midoriya. But Deku poses that if they want to go for utility, it's Momo. If they want to go for like basic defense and ability to protect people, it's Kirishima. But that if it's based on raw power, that it's between himself, Bakugo, and Todoroki. And they all find his analyses of the concept of who is strongest to be very insightful. And Sue then tells Deku that she typically says what's on her mind. Deku isn't entirely sure exactly where this is going, but then she begins to blurt out that she finds his and Uraraka's connection or relation to each other to be very intimate. Deku tilts his head and says that, well, me and her are dating, so is that what you mean? Mina utterly loses her shit. Like, she literally begins to lose her mind. She's like, "You're kidding me." He's like, "What? Did I do something wrong?" She's like, No, sweetheart. No. You did nothing wrong. But you're telling me you enrolled to UA as a couple? He's like, well, is there anything wrong with that? She's like, No. There's nothing wrong with that, sweetheart. How long have you known each other? He replies, a year? She's like, ooh, this is getting interesting. Then Aizawa basically tells all his problem children to shut up. Deku's ears kind of like droop a bit and says, "Except for you, Midori, you're fine." It's all the other problem children that need to calm down. It's too early for this, he says, as he drinks from his cup of like black coffee. He's like just muttering under his breath. He's so tired, and that they're too loud for this, especially since it's early morning. But nevertheless, they get to the USJ and are met by a Hero 13. Now Deku knows his heroes, and he knows. I mean, he knows that his girl is about to lose it, because he knows in his heart, he has learned this over a long period of time, that Uraraka, her favorite hero is Hero 13. She thinks that Hero 13 is the coolest. He has also bought her a lot of Hero 13 merch from time to time, and has found himself basically had his ear talked off about how, like, all these little Hero 13 facts. Hero 13, basically, she tells all the students that they are there to learn how to use their quirks to help people. Now, obviously, the battle trials, they showed them that their quirks can hurt people. Obviously, like her quirk. Her quirk could easily kill people or hurt people, but she uses it for good. And she wants to teach them how to use their quirks to rescue people, and to show them that they're not, just because they have a flashy quirk that can be dangerous doesn't mean that they have to be always fighting and they can't rescue people. They can use their quirks in many different ways to rescue people. Is essentially what she's getting at. And it's at this moment that Izuku sees Aizawa approach Hero 13 and kind of whisper over to 13. And with Izuku's incredible sense of hearing, he hears Aizawa say to 13, "Hey, where's All Might?" Hero 13 says, Nezu told me that he's past his 3-hour limit. Deku's thinking to himself, what? 3 hours? All Might? Why does All Might have a 3-hour limit? Now, Deku's not stupid. He freaking has the intelligence department covered. He knows that there's something afoot. And it's at this moment that they enter the USJ, and while they're all looking around, Deku catches a scent that smells like rotting flesh, like rotten flesh, a bunch of sweaty dudes. Let's see, a lot of fish, literal fish, not that, like actual, like aquatic life. He smells gunpowder, oil that you'd use to to polish metal. He smells a lot of stuff, and he's like, what the hell is that smell? And then he looks down at the plaza and sees this portal with this dude who looks like he has not had a single stick of tube of Carmex in his life. Like, this man looks like he needs 3 jars of Carmex to fix all of that in his face. He tells Aizawa, "Hey, did y'all hire a crusty dude?" And as Aizawa is responding, or like turning around to see what Deku is talking about, crusty people, he sees the portal and basically gets into butt whooping mode and jumps down the steps as he yells for 13 to get the students back to the bus. That those are real villains. And Deku just watches Aizawa go to town, just whooping everyone. He watches him basically like jump down the stairs, like kick someone in the face, use a scarf to like pull himself towards another, like wrap someone up and then fling him into another person. And then Deku kind of like, while looking over the horizon of villains, he sees this ugly bird with its brain just sticking out of its head, and he's like, that doesn't make sense. What kind of quirk does that thing have? What is it, like some kind of like mutation where it just like got hit by the ugly tree? And as 13 is trying to get the students to leave the building to get back to the bus, this black mist kind of just like pops up in front of them, and it says, "I'm sorry to intrude, but we are the League of Villains, and we've come here to kill All Might. But it appears All Might isn't here. I'm sorry to do this, but Master wishes for you to be separated now." And as Kurogiri just starts shooting black mass out in every direction, Deku is essentially just like pushing as many people out of the way of the black mist as he can. But unfortunately, in his attempt to try and help people, he gets swallowed up by the black mist. And he gets sent to the, I think it's called I don't want to send him to the boat. I'm going to say that he gets sent to the, you know what, screw it, I'm make it canon. He basically falls out of the portal and hits the water. And as he hits the water, he looks around and sees this ugly fish dude with like a wide basking shark looking mouth. And he's like, "Oh, hell no." And he starts trying to swim up towards the boat, but obviously he's like not, he's basically trying to like swim away from someone who is literally a fish. And as he's like predicting he's about to get like bitten, he suddenly sees Sue kick the basking shark villain away and then pull him onto the boat with her tongue. He thanks her, and they begin to kind of take note of their surroundings. They begin to like figure out what's going on, and as they do, they see villains start peeking their head out of the water, which by all means starts to very not so subtly disturb Izuku, because he doesn't appreciate basically like being surrounded by villains. Though he does have the sensation of being very hungry for meat. He begins to fantasize about eating these villains, but knows that he can't. Well, that is, unless he just takes a small chunk of meat. But even then, that's kind of pushing it. But nevertheless, him and Sue begin to devise a plan where he essentially transforms and he has her basically hold on to his collar, since Suyu isn't Ochako and doesn't have a special attachment to her suit that allows her to, for lack of a better phrase, ride him like a majestic beast. So essentially, she grabs on tight to his collar, and he just transforms into his full wolf form. And after getting himself ready, he sees one of the villains basically use bring water out of the ground, and just as they're about to send a blade of water at the boat, he jumps with all his strength towards the shore, quickly shifting back into his human form and grabbing onto Sue in order to to cushion her fall. And they basically land just before the shore, leading to where Aizawa and the others are. As they're sitting there, basically away from all the villains, they begin to look around and observe the situation that's going on. Izuku figures that more students more than likely got sent to other areas in the plaza, but for the majority, most of them are still with Aizawa and Hero 13, so at the very least, they didn't get all the students separated, just a few of them. Now, from where Izuku is sitting, he can't see Ida, so he suspects that either Ida has gone for help or essentially been sent with another group somewhere else randomly in the facility. Now, it was at this moment that he saw the big bird basically smashing in Aizawa's face. Repeatedly slamming his head into the ground. While basically this was going on, Izuku's blood was beginning to boil. Because he didn't want to let the villains get away with hurting his teacher. And obviously, if it wasn't for Mr. Aizawa, there'd be a lot more villains in the main area than the students could deal with. At the moment, the Hero 13 appears to also be at the very top of the stairs, badly injured. And with Deku's blood running, he doesn't know where his Uraraka is. And that's when he noticed her just beside 13, basically in a panic, trying to help her to stay alive. She looked like she was terrified and scared. Deku's blood began to boil over when he saw the fear in her eyes, looking around. he hated the look of fear in her eyes, and he just saw red. He transformed into his hybrid form and bolted towards the bird monster, slamming it off of Aizawa and pinning it to the ground. It pushed on him and threw him towards the fountain, making him basically hit the concrete configuration in the middle, which practically made him very sore. It hurt a lot, but ignoring the pain, he basically jumped right back towards the Nomu and interlocked his fingers as Aizawa began to try and get back up, but he shouted to Aizawa to stay down, that he'll take care of this thing. And that's when the anti-Carmex Krusty Boy decided he was going to yell out that there was no way that he was going to be able to defeat his Nomu, as he called it, because it has shock absorption, it has super strength, and it has regeneration. Deku did not care in the moment what the hell the damn thing had. He couldn't care if the thing had chainsaws coming out its legs and teeth that would basically fire out of its mouth like a missile. He was not going to just stand around while these villains attacked his friends. He began to power himself up further and further. With the adrenaline pumping through his body, he found himself gathering strength and courage, pushing himself to push past his limits and force the thing back. It pushed him away and then gave him a severe punch to the gut. And it was at this moment Deku began to really, really go all out. He knew that this thing was just gonna be able to take his punches, but shock absorption is distribution of kinetic energy. He never said that this thing was resilient to other forms of damage. So, Deku began to devise a plan and transformed into his full werewolf form, being of a greater stature. This thing that was known as a Nomu, basically it jumped towards him, and Izuku, in an attempt to basically try and experiment with what kinds of damage he can do, he rushed towards the Nomu back and began to dig its teeth into its arms, practically chewing through all that muscle, and it didn't seem to respond to pain, which he found rather intriguing. What he didn't find intriguing was it repeatedly punching him in his neck, trying to get him to let go. Then Deku, in an attempt to try and basically stall for time to get rid of the bigger boss, pulling the strings of this beast, he chomped down harder on its arm and flung it towards the flood zone, and then began to make a beeline towards Shigaraki, trying to essentially take out the leader. But before he could reach Shigaraki, the black portal began to like make its way back towards him, like basically shielding Shigaraki. Just before he hit the warp gate, he saw a metal glint, shifted back to his hybrid form, and sent his hand in a piercing position towards the metal like brace, which caused Kurogiri to be flung backwards, essentially nullifying the warp gates. And as Deku swung towards Shigaraki, the Nomu basically like got back in time to take the hit in his stead, this causing the Nomu to have had its leg lopped off by Deku's claws. And Deku, taking the advantage, like grabbed the Nomu's shoulder, swung around to its back, and basically tried pinning it to the ground. This, unfortunately, leaving him wide open. And as Shigaraki began to run towards him to, like, decay him, he spun around with Shigaraki basically, like, jumping to like, put all 5 fingers of both hands on him. And just before he got to Izuku flipped, having Shigaraki put both his hands on his Nomu, effectively destroying a very massive portion of the Nomu. Which Shigaraki just started cussing to himself for having done something so stupid. And as the Nomu had basically had a bunch of itself, like, destroyed from Shigaraki touching it, Deku basically, pulled his legs forward and, in a motion, kicked upwards in a similar fashion to a horse bucking someone off, and launched Shigaraki towards the fountain, having him hit it this time, with Shigaraki basically letting out a very guttural groan from having hit the thing full force. And as Deku threw the partially destroyed Nomu to the side, he began to have his stomach turn as he saw the disgusting bird creature begin to regenerate its body, which Izuku found very interesting. Fresh, unkillable meat is what he saw. He basically saw the buffet of a lifetime. And since there was no one to stop him, he ran towards the Nomu and began eating chunks off of it while fighting it, making it look like he was just trying to hurt it, but the boy was eating it. He had to say, quite 7 out of 10 would eat again. If it wasn't for the fact that the damn thing's skin just tasted like a leather boot. It would its hide was really tough. That made it closer to a 3 out of 10, but the actual flavor was just immaculate to Izuku. All jokes aside, he kept trying to tear the damn thing apart, but it kept regenerating faster than he could cut away at its flesh. Now, as hard as he had tried, it seemed like this thing just wouldn't break. With Shigaraki basically getting up and telling Izuku that it's futile to try and kill his Nomu, that it was built to defeat All Might. It's at this moment that Deku basically tries to go after Shigaraki again, and as he's going for another slash at Shigaraki, another warp gate opens up, but this time it's directly in front of his face. And through the warp gate comes Shigaraki's hand, which almost grabs Izuku directly in his face. If it wasn't for the fact that Izuku had very, very good reflexes on his side. Now, it's at this moment that the Nomu fully regenerates and basically pins Deku from behind, basically slamming him into the ground, just like he had done to Aizawa, who basically had passed out at this point because of his injuries. And as hard as Izuku fought to try and get the thing off his back, it was futile, as the damn thing just kept slamming his head into the ground, except the Shigaraki began to order the Nomu to essentially punt to get a payback for him having hit the fountain himself, and had the Nomu basically break Izuku's left arm and also shatter the bones in his shatter his ribs by crushing him. The Nomu, after crushing his arm, basically put both its hands on his back or his sides and began to squeeze slowly, making each of his ribs pop, crack, and break. And at one point, Shigaraki told the Nomu to try and basically cripple Deku by crushing his tailbone. And it did. It grabbed right below Izuku's tailbone and it severed it. And it left large finger-shaped gashes in his back. And it's at this point that Deku begins to feel as if his whole body is screaming and on fire. And he hears a very faint sound as he begins to laugh. Shigaraki looks at him and says, "What are you laughing at, you brat?" Deku then speaks up saying, "He's here, you moron. Your worst nightmare is about to pop through that door." It's in that moment All Might has arrived. But he's not smiling. Deku, all he can do is watch as All Might essentially just begins to destroy the Nomu. Begins to utterly defeat it before sending it through the skylight. But unfortunately, it seems that All Might is beginning to like lose like run out of steam. Deku is slowly healing his wounds, but he knows that if something doesn't change, whatever 3-hour limit means is going to happen, and it's not going to be pretty. And just as his tailbone begins to reconnect itself, he sees Shigaraki basically like make a dead sprint towards All Might. And as Deku is basically like half dragging, half running in his wolf form to intercept, a loud gunshot rings out in the USJ as basically Shigaraki is shot in his hand and in both of his legs and shoulder before Kurogiri then like shields him and takes him away in a portal. Deku thinks to himself, it's finally over. And he prays that whatever is wrong with All Might will be fixed. The Recovery Girl and all the other teachers, basically, they go around and they collect all the students. They make sure that they round up all the villains and ensure the students' safety, but Deku's body is mostly destroyed. He was able to fix or regenerate the damage from his tailbone, but his whole left arm, all the bones in his arm are shattered and broken into shards. He can't even feel it at the moment. He's worried that it's so broken that it won't be able to regenerate or fix. But they basically wheel him off with Ochako by his side, afraid the whole time. They take him to Recovery Girl's office, and he basically wakes up a couple hours later to the smell of antiseptics and chemicals. With him looking around, he sees the room that he can only describe as a nurse's office. When he looks over, he sees Uraraka on like a half asleep, like laying on like next to his right side on the bed while sitting on a chair. Recovery Girl comes over and declares that he's finally awake and that he gave her quite the run for her money trying to heal his wounds. She warned Izuku that he suffered a lot of damage from the villains and that he's gonna have to be bedridden for a couple days. And that he's gonna need a lot of help to eat and to basically get the feeling back in his legs, since they did destroy his collarbone, or not tailbone. So he's probably gonna she tells him that if, like, worst case scenario, he's gonna have to go through physical therapy to make his legs work again, because you don't just come back from something like that. And if it wasn't for his healing factor, that they'd have to more than likely amputate his left arm because of how bad the damage is. She warned him that healing factor doesn't mean that he's immortal and that he can survive any wound. It just means that he has a better time, like, making up for mistakes during a battle, but that he shouldn't rely on it all the time. That getting hurt to, like, just because it's convenient is not a good way to fight. That it's a very toxic mindset to fight in such a way. Izuku understands where she's coming from, and he understands that the type of fighting style that she's proposing, that most people with a regeneration based quirk or have a side like healing factor with their quirk, like, usually don't think thoroughly about not just becoming a walking tank that can just take all the hits. That they need to still be careful about what kind of injuries they get, because some you just don't return from. Now, Deku, on the other hand, he was very lucky that... She tells him that he was very lucky that he didn't end up paralyzed, and that there's still a chance for him to, like, gain feeling back in his arms and legs, and that from now on he needs to not be as reckless. He understands and thanks her for all her help. She tells him that it's no trouble, and that he needs to, like, practice better, like self-preservation, essentially. Though she does commend him for his bravery and trying to protect or to help save his teacher and prevent other students from having to, like, get injured by the head villains and their ugly bird creature that the villains called a Nomu. It's at this moment that a very like familiar old man who looks emaciated enters the room. Deku then gets that same smell of old blood, and he finally figures out what that whole he finally figures out the whole puzzle that has been bothering him since he smelt that scent of old blood on All Might weeks ago. But he doesn't blurt it out. Instead, he gives All Might this look like he just figured something out, which kind of unsettles All Might. He feels very concerned that a boy has more than likely figured out his secret just by looking at him for some reason. But nevertheless, I think I'm going to leave it there. I hope you all enjoyed. And don't forget, the shadows are watching.